She crashed her millionaire husband's wedding with twins. What she did in front of everyone shocked the world. Welcome back, beautiful souls, to Alcott Stories, where every heartbeat has a story and every tear has meaning. Before we begin, let me ask you something. What would you do if the man who once left you pregnant and broken was now standing at the altar, marrying someone else? And what if you crashed that wedding, not to beg, but to show the world the strength you built without him? Today's story is about love, betrayal, survival, and a woman's powerful rise from ashes to glory. It will move you, it may break you, but it will also inspire you. Let's start with a love prayer. May every heart that's been broken find its healing. May every soul that's been forgotten rise in purpose. And may every woman who once cried in silence one day walk like a queen in her own power. Amen. Before we dive into the story, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city and time in the comments below. I love connecting with each of you. And hey, if you believe in stories that touch hearts and change lives, don't forget to subscribe to Alcott Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single chapter. Before the flash of cameras and the shadow of power distorted his heart, Logan Hart was just a man in love, a deeply flawed, quietly passionate man whose world centered on Alina, the brown-skinned beauty with eyes like warm earth and a spirit that healed everything it touched. He met her before boardrooms mattered, back when his dreams were scrawled on napkins and success was a whisper in the dark. Alina had walked into his life like sunlight through a cracked door, and suddenly nothing else mattered. Not the deals he was chasing, not the legacy he was trying to build, only her laughter in the silence and her presence in the chaos. Their love was raw, electric, alive. It didn't need chandeliers or ballrooms. It needed only the quiet hum of an air conditioner in a modest hotel room, the glow of city lights slipping through thin curtains, and the way their hands found each other like they'd done it in another lifetime. Alina would lie beside him, her curls scattered across his chest, and whisper dreams instead of demands. "I don't need the world, Logan," she once said, her fingers tracing invisible promises on his skin. "I only want you." And in that moment he believed love could be enough. They married without a crowd, no photographers, no expensive venue, just two souls saying yes in the dim hush of a courthouse, hearts pounding louder than vows. Alina wore a simple white dress, and Logan couldn't take his eyes off her, not because of how she looked, but because of how she made him feel, anchored, chosen, alive. But as his empire grew, so did the noise. Money brought luxury, and luxury brought pride. The same man who once memorized the curves of her lips now memorized profit margins and stock prices. Where her voice once calmed him, now the voice of business partners began to drown her out. Whispers in polished boardrooms turned into doubts in his mind. "She's not one of us," they'd murmur. "She doesn't look like the women on magazine covers." The pressure to present a picture-perfect life began to crush the memory of their imperfectly perfect love. Logan stopped coming home early. He started wearing masks made of suits and silence. Alina would wait, dinner's cold, heart colder. When he did speak, his words grew guarded, rehearsed. More business deal than husband. She noticed how his gaze lingered longer on socialites at charity galas, how he stopped touching her like she mattered. She tried to fight for their love, writing notes, planning small dates, reminding him of the boy who once held her hand under the stars, but he grew distant, chasing something shinier, emptier. Alina became invisible in the life they built together, a shadow in designer hallways, a ghost in golden rooms. One night, as they lay inches apart yet worlds away, she reached out and asked, "Do you still love me?" And his silence was louder than any betrayal. That was when she knew the man who once held her like a treasure now treated her like a secret. Logan, once so tender, now cared more about the image in the mirror than the reflection in her eyes. The warmth between them became cold marble, and while Alina still carried his name, he carried the weight of ambition, choosing validation over vows. What began in whispering hotel rooms now lived in a house, where even their echoes had stopped speaking. And as she looked at the man beside her, Alina realized the harshest truth. Love, when neglected, doesn't die loudly. It fades in silence, in distance, in nights where hands don't meet and eyes don't speak. She still loved him, painfully so. But even love, no matter how deep, cannot bloom in soil poisoned by pride. The house was quiet except for the relentless patter of rain against glass, as if the sky itself mourned what was about to happen. Logan stood near the fireplace, divorce papers trembling in his hand, the flame's reflection flickering off the silver cufflinks he wore like armor. He didn't look at her directly, but his voice, flat, controlled, unfamiliar, cut through the silence like a blade. "I can't do this anymore, Alina. You deserve someone simpler. This life isn't for you." Alina's breath hitched, not because of the words, but the detachment behind them. She stepped closer, heart thudding painfully against her ribs, one hand instinctively resting on her lower abdomen. "I'm pregnant, Logan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but each syllable shaking with disbelief. 3 months? Our baby. She watched the blood drain from his face, but still, he said nothing. No gasp, no embrace, no remorse, just silence, a void where love should have been. That silence shattered her. Her hands began to tremble as tears welled up, not from weakness, but from the cruel realization that the man who once made vows over her, Heartbeat now couldn't offer a word over their unborn child. She waited, hoped for a miracle, for a flicker of regret in his eyes, but he simply turned away, shoulders stiff, as though her confession was an inconvenience rather than a cry for connection. With a shattered dignity she could barely hold on to, Alina packed a single suitcase, her limbs moving like they didn't belong to her. She left behind their wedding photo, the engagement ring she once wore like a promise, and the last remnants of trust she'd buried beneath his indifference. The cold air outside bit her cheeks, but it was kinder than his silence. Rain soaked her as she stepped into the street, each drop a cruel echo of the love she once knew. She walked without direction, without plan, only with instinct, the desperate instinct of a mother who now had 2 tiny heartbeats depending on her. The pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical, a weight in her chest that throbbed with every step. No alimony, no support, no apology. Just freedom wrapped in betrayal. Every street she crossed, every breath she took in that storm, became a quiet vow she would not break. She would cry, yes. She would scream into pillows at night, collapse on bathroom floors with swollen feet and an aching back. But she would rise for them, for the children he chose to ignore. There were nights she went to bed hungry so she could save every cent for doctor visits. She learned to sew with trembling hands, selling clothes out of a plastic bag at street corners, smiling through exhaustion. And yet in every stitch there was strength. When her ankles swelled and her bones ached, she whispered lullabies to her belly, telling them stories of courage, of resilience, of a mother who refused to be defined by abandonment. She watched other couples in parks and pretended not to ache. She passed baby stores and bit her lip to keep from crying. Every movement reminded her she was alone, but not unloved. Her babies kicked in the night, reminding her of the life still worth fighting for. The nights were long, often cruel, and loneliness curled around her like a second skin. But in those quiet hours, she transformed. From abandoned to awakened, from broken to becoming. She read parenting books borrowed from second-hand shelves, scribbled business ideas on napkins, practiced pitches while holding her swollen stomach. And as the world moved on without Logan Hart's apology, Alina began to move forward with something far more powerful: purpose. She never spoke his name again, not out of hatred, but because he no longer deserved space in her story. He had turned his back on love. She had turned pain into fuel. And on the day she gave birth, with no one by her side except a tired midwife and a cheap plastic hospital bed, she held her twins and smiled, not because it was easy, but because they were her beginning, not her burden. Their tiny cries filled the room like the anthem of a new era. Logan may have chosen silence that night, but her children would grow up with the sound of strength in every word she spoke, every dream she chased, and every mountain she climbed alone. The hospital room smelled of bleach and new beginnings as Alina cradled her newborn twins, her eyes swollen but shining with a fierce kind of love. The kind that doesn't wait for permission to exist. She walked out of that hospital with 2 tiny bundles and no one waiting outside. No car, no congratulations. Just the biting wind and the unspoken question of how. But Alina didn't crumble. She wrapped her babies in thrifted blankets and carried them into a world that had already counted her out. Her mornings began before the sun, stuffing bottles and diapers into a worn-out bag, dropping her twins at a kind neighbor's place with promises she'd somehow repay. She cleaned law firm offices, while men in suits walked past her like she was invisible. Their polished shoes squeaking across the floors she scrubbed with blistered hands. In the evenings, she tied on a stained apron and waited tables at a greasy diner, smiling at strangers who barely looked up when she poured their coffee. Her feet throbbed, her back ached, but when she came home, her soul softened. She'd hum lullabies in the dark, her tears soaking the pillow as Liam and Liana curled beside her, their little fingers clutching hers like anchors. By midnight, when the world was asleep, she'd sit at a rusted sewing machine, stitching scraps into hope, turning forgotten fabrics into beauty. There were nights the machine jammed and she cried out in frustration, punching the table, whispering apologies to her babies for the world's cruelty. One night, Liana tugged her sleeve and asked, "Mama, why don't we have a daddy?" Alina paused, kneeling so their eyes met. "Because we have each other," she said softly, kissing her daughter's forehead. "And that's more than enough." That moment burned itself into her soul like a vow. She'd never let them feel the absence, only the abundance of her love. As the years crawled forward, so did her courage. She began selling her handmade clothes at flea markets on Sundays, watching the way women's faces lit up when they tried on her pieces. Word spread like wildfire. "The girl with gold hands," they whispered. She upgraded her machine, then a studio, then a team, and suddenly, the girl who once cried over jammed thread was designing dresses worn by socialites and stars. Her fashion startup, Liana Threads, named after her twins, grew from sweat and scars. Alina stood at fashion expos, pitching to investors with trembling hands, but fire in her voice. She learned the language of business, but never forgot the voice of her struggle. She wore her pain like pearls, elegant but hard-earned. Magazine covers began calling. Her Instagram overflowed with admiration, collaborations, success. Yet even as cameras flashed, she never lost sight of the shadows she'd walked through. She kept a framed photo of Liam and Liana on her desk, their blue eyes reminding her that love could be born from heartbreak. She still remembered the night she launched her brand officially, standing in front of a packed crowd, her breath catching not from nerves, but from the voice inside her that whispered, "Look how far you've come." After the event, she drove home alone and found her twins asleep, wearing T-shirts from her brand, faces peaceful. She sat beside them, brushing a curl from Liam's forehead, whispering, "Mama's doing this for you." And yet, despite the applause, the success, the international recognition, there were still nights when silence pressed too close, and she'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if the man who walked away ever thought about the life he left behind. Not because she missed him, but because a part of her needed to know if hearts that cold ever thawed. Still, she didn't allow bitterness to grow roots. Her focus was forward. Her power was purpose. She employed single mothers. She mentored young girls from broken homes. She became the very woman she wished she'd known when her world had fallen apart. She didn't want revenge. She wanted redemption, not for him, but for herself. And though she never sought his face again, his presence lingered in her children's eyes. The same icy blue that once betrayed her now loved her unconditionally. She'd stare at them sometimes and say, "You have his eyes, but you'll have your own story." And each time they smiled, she knew they'd write it in fire just like she did. The sun streamed gently through the glass walls of Alina's design studio, casting golden light across mood boards, fabric rolls, and sketches that had turned her survival into success. But peace shattered the moment. Her assistant walked in with a crisp tabloid folded in half and tension clinging to every step. Alina didn't need to open it to feel the weight of the name it carried. Her fingers reached for the newspaper slowly, as if touching it might ignite old wounds she'd buried beneath layers of progress. But the headlines screamed louder than any memory. "Millionaire, Logan Hart to marry," Socialite Sabrina Wells in Lavish. Garden wedding. Her hands stiffened, the page crinkling slightly beneath her touch, and her breath caught, not out of pain, but from the jarring echo of a past that never truly stayed buried. The name that once made her tremble with love, now only summoned a flicker of something colder, recognition, not longing. She stared at the smiling photo of Logan and Sabrina, his arm wrapped around a woman carved out of high society, flawless and empty. The contrast between that image and the memories of him, whispering dreams into her neck, holding her waist in rundown hotel rooms, felt like two different worlds colliding inside her chest. Her eyes narrowed, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "You left me pregnant, Logan," she murmured to the paper, the words laced with calm fury. "But I built my own empire, and our kids know nothing about you." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. She had weathered storms far crueler than this headline. Just then, her assistant hesitated, holding out an envelope with gold, trim and cursive writing so artificial it felt insulting. "This just came," she said softly, almost as if handing over a loaded weapon. Alina took it, slowly peeled it open, and unfolded the embossed wedding invitation. The words were formal, almost theatrical, inviting guests to witness Logan's fresh start beneath a canopy of roses and privilege. She stared at the date, the venue, the names, each one landing like a silent drumbeat of disrespect. For a moment she just sat there, the studio around her falling into stillness. The past wasn't knocking, it had barged in uninvited, but this time she wasn't the girl he left. She was the woman he'd regret losing. Her smile came slowly, not out of joy, but resolution. "We're going," she said aloud, standing with a grace carved from years of endurance. Her assistant blinked, surprised. Alina picked up her phone and texted the nanny to dress the twins in their best outfits. "Time to meet your father," she added quietly, the words thick with intention, not nostalgia. That evening, she sat on the edge of her bed as Liam and Liana twirled around in excitement, unaware of the history they were about to walk into. She chose a dress that made a statement, elegant, commanding, unforgettable, a deep crimson satin that wrapped around her like defiance. She slid on heels taller than her fears and painted, her lips the same shade as her. Pain, bold, unapologetic. As she dressed, she stared into the mirror, not seeing the woman he once left, but the woman who had become everything without him. She didn't shake. She didn't flinch. She was steel wrapped in silk. Before leaving, she knelt beside her children and held their tiny hands. "You're going to meet a man today," she said softly, brushing a curl from Liana's forehead. "He helped make you, but he didn't help raise you." Liam looked confused. "Is he nice?" She didn't lie. "He used to be. But people change. Just remember, you didn't need him to grow strong. You had me." And they nodded, because even at their young age, they understood love lived in action, not absence. On the ride to the venue, Alina watched the streets fly by like scenes from a life she'd left behind. Her heart beat steadily, not because she was unafraid, but because fear had long lost its grip on her. As the garden gates came into view, grand and dripping with wealth, her jaw set. This wasn't about confrontation. This was about closure. This was about making sure Logan saw, with his own eyes, the life he abandoned and the strength he underestimated. The security at the gate tried to hesitate, until she handed over the invitation and locked eyes with the manager. "Tell the groom Alina Hart has arrived," she said calmly, her voice like velvet laced with fire. She stepped onto the marble path, her twins on either side, their matching blue eyes wide with wonder. Guests began to turn, their whispers rising like a wave, and Alina, radiant and poised, walked into the very heart of the betrayal, not to plead, not to fight, but to show the world that the woman who had once been erased had rewritten her name in gold. Gasps rippled through the air like a sudden gust of wind as Alina stepped past the white flower archway, her royal blue gown flowing like liquid defiance across the marble path. Heels clicking with precision poise, and a quiet rage that shook the very ground she walked on. All eyes turned, mouths parted in stunned silence, as her presence halted the music, the chatter, even the heartbeat of the man waiting at the altar. Logan's spine stiffened as his eyes fell on her, and for a moment, the world around him blurred, because there she was, the woman he had thrown into the shadows, now walking in like royalty, not alone, but with two beautiful children whose faces mirrored the very blood in his veins. Liam and Liana held her hands, their small feet matching her powerful stride, and the sight struck him harder than any spoken word. "Alina?" Logan's voice cracked, barely audible, disbelief carving deep into his once confident expression. But she didn't pause. She didn't flinch. She walked straight toward the altar, where roses bloomed and betrayal bloomed louder. "You forgot something before saying 'I do,'" she said, her voice clear and sharp like glass snapping in the sunlight. "Or should I say 2 things?" The crowd turned toward the twins, their matching blue eyes wide with innocence, framed by their mother's quiet strength. Sabrina, standing in her glittering white gown, stumbled back a step, her manicured fingers tightening around her bouquet as the moment unraveled in front of hundreds of guests and cameras, clicking in rapid fire. But Alina wasn't done. Her palm rose with purpose and landed hard against Logan's cheek, the crack of it echoing across the stunned silence like thunder, rolling through polished perfection. "That," she shouted, her voice shaking with emotion but not with regret, "was for every tear I cried alone. Every night I worked 3 jobs while your children asked me where their father was. And every lie you told me, while building a life you swore I wasn't good enough for." Logan's face turned pale, his jaw slack, as if the truth had finally pierced his diamond-plated ego. They're mine?" he asked, but it wasn't a question. It was an admission, a breaking, a collapse of the lie he had lived for 3 years. Alina stepped aside so the crowd could see Liam and Liana clearly. And in that moment it was undeniable. Their eyes, that icy ocean blue, the same curl in the smile, the same spark in their gaze. "They have your eyes," she said coldly, "but they have my strength. And don't worry, they've never needed your money. Only your truth." Whispers roared through the garden like wildfire, guests recording with trembling hands, others looking away in guilt or awe. Sabrina's lips parted in stunned horror as she stared at the man beside her, the man she was moments away from marrying. Realizing she didn't know half the truth, Logan stepped forward, but Alina raised a hand, commanding him to stay still. "You don't get to walk closer now. You had your chance 3 years ago, when I stood there 3 months pregnant, begging you to see me. And you looked away." Logan swallowed hard, his voice strangled by regret. "Alina, Don't," she snapped. "Don't call my name like it still belongs to your mouth." Her eyes flicked across the crowd, some shocked, some moved, some ashamed of ever judging the woman he left. "This isn't about revenge," she continued, voice calm now, slicing through the luxury like a blade. "This is about restoration, about standing in the place you thought I'd never reach and showing you I never needed to be rescued. I only needed to be remembered." Logan dropped to his knees in front of the twins, emotions unraveling across his face, shock, shame, sorrow, but neither child moved. They looked up at him like a stranger, their silence heavier than words. "I don't expect forgiveness," he choked, "but I want to know them." Alina's eyes didn't soften. "You want to know them? Start by knowing what it cost to raise them without you. Start by learning that apologies are whispered in actions, not speeches." A hush fell again as Alina turned to her children. "Say goodbye, babies." And they waved, not with hate but with unfamiliarity. She took their hands once more and walked back down the aisle, not needing applause or pity, just peace. Behind her, Logan collapsed on the steps of the altar, head in hands, a man who had everything and suddenly realized what everything truly meant. And all around them the garden bloomed, no longer with roses, but with the echo of truth spoken by a woman who was never meant to be silent. The altar was still draped in roses, but Logan Hart sat beneath it like a fallen statue, stripped of illusion, his face buried in his hands as the scent of flowers mocked him with their softness. The ceremony had collapsed, guests shuffled away in murmurs, and Sabrina had left in a silent rage. her designer heels stabbing into the marble as she walked away from a man who couldn't bury his past. But Logan didn't follow her. He didn't move at all, not for hours. The weight of Alina's voice, her slap, the truth reflected in the children's eyes, it echoed like sirens through his brain. That night, alone in his penthouse, Logan stared at the walls lined with awards, suits pressed in gold-lit closets, and glasses of untouched whiskey. None of it mattered anymore, because for the first time in his life, silence wasn't peaceful, it was punishment. He scrolled through old photos, finding one buried deep in his phone, Alina, years ago laughing in a hotel bed, sunlight painting her face. He remembered how safe her laughter felt, how real her love was, and how easily he let the world convince him to throw it all away. Guilt wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a roar, one that bled into every hour of every day. He called once. She declined. He called again, then again. Left voicemails, ones where his voice cracked, ones where he admitted things he never said aloud. I was scared. I was stupid. I'm sorry. But Alina never responded. When he tried showing up at her studio, her assistant met him at the door with a firm stare and a polite rejection. He watched from afar as Alina walked out with her twins. Proud, composed, untouchable. He realized then she wasn't cold. She was protecting peace she had earned through fire. He tried writing letters, long ones, soaked in apology, but never mailed them. He wasn't sure if he was worthy of being forgiven or even remembered. Days blurred into nights, and regret curled around his throat like a rope. Every time he passed a playground, every time he saw a father lift a child into the air, he felt a sharp twist in his chest. That should have been him. But it wasn't. He'd given up the right the moment he signed those papers, the moment he chose status over soul. One evening his phone buzzed. Unknown number, hospital, time froze. When he arrived, the sterile hallway smelled like bleach and dread. Nurses whispered as they recognized him, but no one stopped him. He found Alina slumped in a plastic chair outside the pediatric ICU, her hands clasped, face pale with fear. She didn't look at him. Didn't need to. He moved quietly into the room where Liam lay, hooked up to machines. Tiny chest rising and falling too slowly. Logan's legs nearly gave out. The boy looked like him. More than ever, fragile, innocent, a mirror of everything he had abandoned. He walked over, knelt beside the bed, and took Liam's small hand in his much larger one. It was warm but weak. His throat tightened. The tears came without permission. "I failed you," he whispered, brushing the boy's fingers with his thumb. "I wasn't there when you took your first breath. I missed your first steps, your first words. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I swear on everything I have, if life gives me one more chance, I'll never walk away again." Behind him, Alina stood in the doorway, watching with unreadable eyes. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer comfort, because this wasn't a moment for them. It was for the boy who didn't even know the man holding his hand. Logan leaned closer, voice shaking. "Fight, little man. Just fight. You're stronger than me. Stronger than anyone I've ever known." Machines beeped. Nurses came and went, but Logan didn't move. He stayed all night, watching the rise and fall of his son's chest, as if willing it to keep going. By morning, Liam stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering, a soft noise escaping his throat. Alina rushed in, tears brimming, and Logan stepped back, giving her space. But before leaving, Liam's tiny hand reached out, barely, and touched Logan's wrist. It wasn't recognition, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. And for Logan, that fragile gesture felt like hope cracking open a locked door. He stood outside the room afterward, alone again, but no longer empty. Because guilt had become something more than pain, it had become purpose. And this time he wasn't chasing redemption for her. He was doing it for the boy who had every reason to never call him father. Liam's strength returned slowly, like dawn inching across a bruised sky. And when his laughter finally echoed down the hospital hallway, days later, it felt like music to hearts that hadn't dared hope too loud. Logan stayed quiet. Present, no grand gestures, just small, meaningful moments. He fetched water, adjusted pillows, read bedtime stories with trembling hands, learning how to be a father one broken piece at a time. One afternoon, after a long night in the ICU, Alina sat beside him in the hushed cafeteria, the weight of unspoken years lingering between them. The coffee before her had gone cold, untouched. Logan's fingers tapped nervously on the table, but he said nothing, knowing for once that silence was hers to fill. Her voice came soft but steady. "I loved you, Logan," she said, eyes not accusing but clear. "I still do. But loving you doesn't mean losing myself again." Her words weren't meant to wound, but to set boundaries where none had existed before. Logan looked up slowly, eyes glossy, not from guilt this time, but gratitude. He nodded, voice thick. "Then let me love you the way I should have before, by respecting you, standing by you and earning you back, not owning you." And in that moment, the apology wasn't a sentence, it was a vow. He didn't ask to come home. He asked to rebuild, even if it meant starting from the outside. Over the next 6 months, things didn't rush. They unfolded. Logan attended co-parenting classes, sat in the audience during Alina's business talks, and spent weekends learning how to braid Liana's hair or help Liam with math. He never brought gifts to win affection. He brought time, consistency, humility. And slowly, the children started smiling wider when he entered the room. Alina watched, not with blind hope, but with measured grace, seeing a man transform, not for her, but because he'd finally seen the mirror of who he used to be and refused to go back. Meanwhile, Liana threads exploded across continents, her story, her fire, her unmatched talent, becoming the face of resilience and reinvention. Magazine covers showcased her, not as someone tied to his legacy, but as a legacy of her own. Invitations poured in from Milan, New York, Paris. One crisp evening, Alina stepped onto a shimmering red carpet in London. Her dress a stunning blend of strength and elegance, the twins on either side, each holding her hand like twin torches of the life she'd fought for. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted her name, and behind her, a few respectful steps away, Logan followed, not as the headline but as the quiet support. No longer the man she leaned on, but the man who understood the privilege of walking behind a woman who'd already carried too much alone. He watched as she posed, head high, confidence radiating from every curve, and his heart ached, not out of longing but reverence. Liana tugged gently at her mother's hand and whispered, "Mommy's a hero." Logan bent down, brushing a hand gently over his daughter's back, voice barely audible above the flashes and cheers. "She always was," he said, eyes moist. That night they returned to their suite, laughter filling the room like it never had before. Alina toasted juice with the twins, while Logan quietly took photos, capturing memories instead of trying to control them. And as the children drifted off to sleep, Alina stood at the balcony, staring at the skyline she once only dreamed of. Logan joined her, not speaking, just sharing the view. "I don't know what the future holds," she whispered, "but I know who I am now. And I won't lose her again." Logan nodded, a soft smile on his face. "You don't have to choose between love and yourself anymore, Alina. This time, I choose you by choosing to grow." She didn't answer, but her hand brushed against his. Not as a promise, but as a maybe. And for him, that was enough. Beneath the city lights, they stood not as what they were, but as who they'd become. Broken, healed, transformed. And Alina, once abandoned, now unstoppable, had risen not because of a man, but in spite of one. She was no longer the story someone else wrote. She was the pen, the fire, the final chapter, and this time it ended on her terms.